All right, out-of-placers. Alex is all set up to interview Professor Pierson. Alex, you're good to go.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Alex Hopper, speaking to you from the observatory at Princeton. I am standing in a large semicircular room, pitch black except for an oblong split in the ceiling. Through this opening, I can see a sprinkling of stars that cast a kind of frosty glow over the intricate mechanism of the huge telescope. The ticking sound you hear is the vibration of the clockwork. Professor Pierson stands directly above me on a small platform, peering through a giant lens. I ask you to be patient, ladies and gentlemen, during the delay that may arise during our interview. Besides his ceaseless watch of the heavens, Professor Pierson may be interrupted by an important call. During this period, he is in constant touch with the astronomical centers of the world. Professor, may I begin our questions?
At any time, Mr. Hooper.
Professor, would you please tell the listeners of the Out of Place podcast what you see as you observe the planet Mars through your telescope?
Nothing unusual at the moment, Mr. Hooper. A red disc swimming in a blue sea. Transverse stripes across the disc. Quite distinct now because Mars happens to be in the point nearest the Earth in opposition, as we call it.
In your opinion, what do these transverse stripes signify, Professor Pearson?
Not canals, I can assure you, Mr. Hooper. Although that's the popular conjunction of those who imagine Mars to be inhabited, from a scientific viewpoint, the stripes are merely the result of atmospheric conditions peculiar to the planet.
Then you're quite convinced as a scientist that living intelligence, as we know it, does not exist on Mars.
I'd say the chances against it are 1,000 to 1.
And yet, how do you account for those gas eruptions occurring on the surface of the planet at regular intervals?
Mr. Hopper, I cannot account for it.
By the way, Professor, for the benefit of our listeners, how far is Mars from Earth?
Approximately 40 million miles?
Well, that seems a safe enough distance. Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Someone has just handed Professor Pierson a message. Let me remind you that we are speaking to you from the observatory in Princeton, New Jersey, where we are interviewing the world-famous astronomer, Professor Pierson. One moment. Professor Pierson has just passed me a message. Professor, may I read this message to the listening audience?
Certainly, Mr. Hopper.
Ladies and gentlemen, I shall read you a wire addressed to Professor Pierson from Dr. Gray of the National History Museum, New York. 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Seismograph registered shock of almost earthquake intensity occurring within a radius of 20 miles of Princeton. Please investigate. Signed, Lloyd Gray, Chief Astronomical Division. Professor Pierson, could this occurrence possibly have something to do with the disturbances observed on the planet Mars?
Hardly, Mr. Hopper. This is probably a meteorite of unusual size, and its arrival at this particular time is merely a coincidence. However, we shall conduct a search as soon as daylight permits.
Thank you, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, moments ago we've been speaking to you from the observatory at Princeton, bringing you a special interview with Professor Pierson, noted astronomer. This is Alex Hopper speaking. We are returning you now to the studio with Stephen Daniel and Rachael Reagan.